Hello and welcome. Welcome to AIL TV. You are talking to a man called Jay. Yes, and tonight, again, it's Wednesday evening, as I promised, I will be showcasing Sudan Knowledge. Now, Sudan Knowledge is an organization created by a friend of mine, Professor Alam Ahmed, and the reason behind that is to bring not only to bring Sudanese from around the world, but to bring other people to know about Sudan and share knowledge and ideas. So in tonight's program, we are going to feature 4 videos. Alam Ahmed, or Professor Alam Ahmed, is very, 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 very interested in the youth. And in fact, he has got that idea that the youth, they have to be helped as much as possible, because that's where the future is. Now, in tonight's video, we are going to feature Basma Khalifa, who is an international fashion journalist. And then we have got a former student, Yusra Abdomoen. I'm not sure whether I'm pronouncing the name properly, but you will have to forgive me for butchering the name. And then we have got 2 adults, both professors. One is from Abdel Aziz University in Saudi Arabia, and that is Nahla Khalifa. She's a nutritionist. She's into nutrition. God, man, I'm just eating my words. I don't know why. And then we have got a guy who is a media specialist. El Sadiq Musa Ahmed is from Malaysia. So, but all these videos were recorded at Stratford University in 2016. So, without wasting much of your time, please enjoy the video or enjoy the program.
So basically my talk is on, are we dispersed but are we united? I think the whole idea is, as young people, me and Yusra representing, got it. We are of our generation, so I think we speak on this best from anyone who has lived here, and obviously Yusra just moved here, but I've lived here all of my life. So I can sort of speak on behalf of both, because I go to Sudan quite a lot, but I wasn't born here, but I was raised here. So basically, who am I? Me and my family moved from Sudan to Northern Ireland when I was 3. I lived there for 11 years before we moved to Scotland. From Scotland, we then stayed there. My parents live there now, and I went to university in a city a few hours away from them. That meant I moved out of home when I was 17 and lived in student accommodation. From there, I graduated with a BA honours in fashion business, so from a business school, and moved to New York for a little while and did an internship. And from there, I then moved to London. So I've been in London for 5 years and have amassed an amazing workload. I've worked with celebrities from Naomi Campbell to Adele. I've traveled to Arizona from New York, from LA. I've managed to do an amazing amount of things. I've worked for Vogue magazine, Harper's Bazaar, and Style magazine. I've done quite a lot. And now I am freelance as a fashion stylist here in London. So basically, being part of the diaspora is an interesting journey. I think on both halves, I kind of feel like I'm a Khawaja here and I'm a Khawaja in Sudan. People look at me here and basically try and guess. I spend just about every day telling people that I'm not from Ethiopia, I'm not from Somalia, I'm not from India, I'm not from Barbados. I play that game every day, along with the fact that my accent doesn't match my face. So it's not great. And then when I go to Sudan, with my amatus, we go to Sugum Derman, and they're always like, Basma, don't talk because they're going to know. But they always know anyway. They always know. So either way, I feel like I am quite in the middle of being Sudanese, but very much being British as well. So basically, Sudan and what we're all about. After a little bit of research, I didn't even realize that we have over 36 million people now in Sudan, and actually our generation make up 60% of the population of Sudan. And I think that's a very important thing to remember, because in the end, then the youth who need to be healthy, skilled, and active are the ones who are going to be able to say what's happening in the future. I think when Professor Alam asked me to have my 2 cents and say what I thought at the end of Friday's session, that was the one thing that I felt like maybe this is missing in terms of the young need to speak up. And it's not necessarily the young who are educated or doing incredibly well, it's also the young who don't know how to speak up or don't know how to say the things they need to say. So it's encouraging those who don't have a voice, because everyone has a voice, they just need to be brought forward and taught how to use their voices. So basically, the youth of Sudan, my favorite thing about the Sudanese in general is that even though we come from a third world country and there's not a lot going on, we are so non-self-deprecating. We're a nation that are so proud of ourselves, and we think the world of ourselves, which is funny when we don't actually have that amazing sustainability situation in Sudan. It's nice that we still look at Sudan and we're like, yeah, we're Sudanese and it's great. Even though everyone else is like, is it though? Is it great? Which is nice. I like that about Sudan. A lot of the young now in Sudan, when I go and I see my cousins or friends, they're so powerful and they're so hungry for change. They're like an unstoppable group of people, which I think is very admirable, depending on their situation and where they are with their families and with money. They're all still very hungry for change. So I think the disconnect that I thought between what's happening in Sudan is they are incredibly active. They have a strong sense of community. The youth are always doing things. They're always together. They're always going to their youth clubs or whatever they're doing. But we necessarily here don't really know what's happening there. So I think there isn't really that communication going from the youth there to the youth here, so that we can understand what they're doing and they can understand what we're doing. Another thing is, which I find very funny, is even when I go to Sudan and we have a cut-off of electricity and the Wi-Fi goes down, somehow everyone's still Instagramming, they're still Facebooking, they're still Snapchatting. The kids there are social. They're very social, and we need to not disregard the fact that they are alert and they are live on the internet. It's not just us because we're in a Western world that we are. They're on it, probably more than we're on it. So I think we need to think about that in terms of how we connect with them. If they're into their social media as much as we are, then what is that connection there and what do we do with that? So yeah, I also thought when we looked at it, a few of my uncles are involved in things, movements such as the following, where young people come together and they do things to help each other and to help the country. That's another thing that we don't necessarily know they do there unless we research. It would be nice to be more aware of what's happening. So these are just a few things that we found out that different people are doing, whether it's healthcare, education, or reconstructing of old buildings. People are doing quite a lot and they're pretty active. I quite like the idea of I'm going to Sudan for my brother's wedding, and I was like, I want to do stuff. I want to go there, I want to see what they're doing, I want to see what's happening, but it's not actually that easy to find. I don't know how to get involved, and I think that's a missing gap in itself as well, how to get involved in what they're doing. So the youth here, which is basically me, we are like them, hungry for success, always willing to achieve. I think coming from a country like Sudan, you almost have that kind of chip on your shoulder where you're like, I'm going to be really successful because I want my country to be proud of me, and I think that's an important thing to go with. The difference here, I'd say, to there is obviously the youth there often live with their families until they get married or they move away or they get a job. Here, I haven't lived with my parents since I was 17, so it's been 9 years since I've lived with my parents. And that can make us fiercely independent. And I think the difference is when you're so independent, you sort of forget what's going on around you and you forget what's happening in your own homeland because you're kind of like, I'm just trying to do what I'm doing here and do it as best as I can. So you can become a bit unaware of what's happening. So yeah, I think I said that before with my identity, with the issue of being Ethiopian, Somalian, Eritrean, whatever everyone else thinks I am. I think Jamaican, that you guessed Jamaican as well. The issues of just not knowing where Basma is, I think in a sense can cause its identity issues in itself to work out who you are, then who you are as Sudanese, and then who you are as British. It's three very different questions, and I think understanding that would be nicer if I had more Sudanese people around me to understand past my family who I am as a young woman. But at the same time, my parents and my family have done an incredible job. It's not to say that I'm not connected to my homeland. My family always laugh because I slip in random Arabic words and add an ing at the end. Like they're always like, "Oh, are you going to Sully?" And I'm like, "I'm going to Sullying in a minute." And they're like, "You can't do that. It's not the same language." So I think I do know what's going on with Sudan, and it's amazing because we've been brought up with the language and maybe brought up with the love and the understanding, and my parents try so hard to take us there quite often. So we are lucky enough that we are connected to the best of their ability. But the difference is when you move on from being a child of your parents and you become an adult, it's figuring out how to connect with that by yourself. And that's maybe a missing gap that I'm just trying to slowly understand myself. The other thing is, I'd say, here we're lucky that we have different job opportunities. I know my cousins or my friends there, they're lawyers, they're doctors, they're vets, they have all those high octane jobs that they do. But here we're allowed to be a little bit more expressive of what we want to do. I mean, the amount of people that I say, when they say, "Well, what do you do?" And I'm like, "Oh, I work in fashion." They're like, "Do you design clothes?" And that's not what I do. But people don't know how many other job opportunities there are out with the high level of doctors and lawyers. I wasn't huge in academia, but I was very creative. And being here, I feel like I was allowed to work on that more. I'm not sure that in Sudan they are as open to that. They just want you to be a doctor or a lawyer, basically. So why the disconnect? I think there's a lack of understanding because of the lack of community. I think here I have 2 Sudanese friends that I've made last year. Other than that, I actually don't really know anyone that I'm not related to. But me and my friends always sit together and we're like, where do these people hang out? What do they do? Where are they? And I think that in itself, we don't know if we don't go to Edgware Road and hang out with them and walk the streets. We don't know what they do. What do the young people here do? Where do they hang out? What do they do? How do they connect with each other? There is a lack of community. And I think the lack of community means that we can't group together to then support Sudan because we aren't even supporting each other at this point. And I think, yeah, as I said before, I think the diaspora has made the youth of here very independent and very self-driven. I think what that does is it means we just kind of go with our own paths and do our own thing, which is great because we're all successful. But I think it would be nice if we could bring our success together and understand how we can do it for a bigger cause. Again, I think it's kind of the same point under a mutual goal, because if you're going to be so self-dependent, so self-driven, is the goal then to make a better Sudan? But not that we don't care, but because we're not there all the time, is the goal to make a better Sudan in a diaspora community here so that we can work together to see what we can do because I will never move back to Sudan, but it doesn't mean that I don't want to be part of Sudan. But do I have to be there to be part of it? I don't necessarily think so. I think it's about working out how to be part of it, but being here, I'm still being part of it. And then again, yeah, the lack of social scene. I think unless it's Eid, unless it's Ramadan, unless it's Friday prayers, there's nothing else happening. There's a huge community here for the Pakistani community and in general a lot of other communities, but I think for the Sudanese or for Arabs in general, there isn't a huge amount happening that you can connect with on a different level. Yes, 5 minutes. So, food for thought, basically. I think Sudanese African youth need to think like the youth for the youth. I think that's the most important statement I can make. We need to think like them, like me, to work out what they need. Secondly, I think increasingly young people live online, so we need to think about the social and cultural interactions they have if you live online. It's not going to be face-to-face. We're lucky enough now to have FaceTime, Tango, Line, all those things, but we need to think about what else we can do past that. And our community is very transient, which means people are constantly coming and going to Sudan. I know myself, I go there for 3 weeks and I come back and get on with my life. And then I'll go again in 2 years. What's happening in those 2 years to make sure I don't forget what happened 2 years ago? That's important. And then I also think there needs to be more mentoring schemes. I think Professor Alam is amazing at setting up things like this so we can all connect together, and he's part of so many amazing groups. But I think for the young, we now need to think, with hopefully your help, that what we do, for us to take it forward without having to always be by ourselves. So a great mentoring scheme. So this is kind of my last slide. I think this I wrote by myself because I just think it makes me think and be so, so proud of Sudan. So basically, whatever the worries and uncertainties, and regardless of how much money our nation has, what I love is Sudanese people, young and old, are so proud and so patriotic of their beautiful country and what it has to offer. We love our sandy roads, we love our Nile, we love our food markets, but most importantly, we love who we are as people. The kindness, the thoughtfulness, and the respect we have towards each other has got our country through the biggest troubles. So listening to the voices of our youth will only benefit the future of our children and their future, and their children too. So my last sort of statement is, we must remember that individually we are one, but together we are an ocean. So we need to come together as children, as youth, as adults, as elders, and think about what we need to do to move forward. Thank you.
So the title of my research is The Economic Impact of Migration on the Welfare of Ethiopian Households. And this research is basically, what I'm basically trying to do is I'm looking at the impact migration has on the consumption expenditure of households. And in order to do that, I need to look and study and analyze the factors that determine the consumption expenditure of households in Ethiopia. And And I'd like to also add that although this research is purely focused on Ethiopia, I think it reflects to an extent the realities in many developing countries. And I think you can draw from it and draw parallels to Sudan. And based on my own experience of living in Sudan, we do exhibit similar migration patterns in Sudan. So just to give you a quick overview, I'm going to start off by giving you a bit of background and motivation behind my research. I'm going to cover the key questions that I aim to answer by the end of this presentation. I'm also going to cover briefly just the current literature and the evidence that's out there in the field. I'm going to describe the household survey that I used and the data, just to put it into context. And then I'm going to describe briefly just the conceptual framework, my methodology. I'm going to discuss the results, and then I'm going to present my conclusions. And I'm hoping to spend a bit more time on the policy implications. Okay, so just to give you a bit of background, and before I start, I want to define what I mean by migration. When I say the word migration, I'm referring to both internal migration, so it's when people move from rural to rural areas or rural to urban areas. And when I refer to international migration, I'm referring to people who move from either rural or urban areas to other countries. And in the case of Ethiopia, a lot of migrants move to Sudan, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the USA. Those are the four most popular destinations for Ethiopian migrants. And migration is a very common strategy for moving out of poverty, because it improves the welfare of households. And the way it does that is it increases households' consumption and investment capacities, okay? And the main benefits of migration accrue through the receipt of remittances, okay? And by remittances, in Arabic, التحويلات, is basically the transfer of cash or in-kind goods. So there's two types of remittances. There's cash remittances or goods. And remittances is basically the transfer of this cash or goods back to their origin households, okay? So their families back home. Yeah, and And basically, I'd also like to add to that, remittances can either be sent through formal or informal channels. So we have formal channels, which are basically money operators such as MoneyGram, UAE Exchange, Western Union, and that sort of thing. But also a lot of remittances go through informal channels and are not recorded. I know as a Sudanese person, when I go back to Sudan, people give me things to carry back home, whether it's cash, whether it's goods, These are things that go unrecorded, but they still count nonetheless as remittances. There's a lot of, I'd also like to say that although remittances are always characterized in numbers, it's a very human story. It's very life-changing. If you look at the reasons why people migrate, 90% of the reason as to why people migrate is for economic reasons. They move to better their own lives, their families' lives, to contribute back to their communities and to their countries of origin. So it's basically, there's a huge impact of remittances. The main benefits, though, of remittances is that they're a very reliable source of foreign exchange earnings, especially for international remittances I'm talking about at the moment. They're also very large. I'd like to present you with this graph. If you look at remittances, recorded remittances, it's that dark blue line. As you can see, if you compare it to official development assistance, ODA, which is basically foreign aid, it is 3 times the size. So at the moment, remittances are over 400 billion, whereas foreign aid is around 150 billion. So we're talking about 3 times as much remittances. So they're very large, okay? They're also growing. So as you can see in the graph, it's constantly rising. They're also a very stable source of capital flows. So relative to, if you see basically foreign direct investment, which is that light purple line, if you look at 2007 during the global recession, remittances didn't react. So they're very resilient to global recessions. They don't respond to fluctuations in interest rates in developed economies, as we see with other external capital flows, such as foreign aid and foreign direct investment. However, the only problem, I guess downside, is that remittances can make households overly dependent. Households rely on remittances, basically. It makes us more complacent. Okay, so the key research questions I'm going to hope to answer is, would households with migrants have been better or worse off had the migrants stayed at home? This is the question I'm going to answer today. And the way I'm going to do that is, and in order to do that, I also need to determine, well, which households are winners and losers and why. And this is these are very interesting questions to pose because job opportunities have opened up for many Ethiopians. They're currently undergoing a booming economy, especially in their construction sector. So it's very important to understand, well, which type of households are more likely to gain or lose? Should members of the household decide to migrate, or are they better off just staying at home? What's the best solution? What's the best outcome? And also, international remittances to Ethiopia have increased by 10-folds. They've gone up from 53 million US dollars in 2000 up to 624 million US dollars in 2012. That's a massive increase. So it's important to be able to study the economic impact of those transfers. The current literature, I'm just going to briefly go through this. The way I view it is there's optimists, so those are people who view migration in an extremely positive light. They see that migration, especially international migration, allows the flow of remittances, experience, skills. It basically allows the influx of all these things, and this basically brings back positive returns to the economy. Okay? So this is basically a very optimistic view because it assumes a very vital agent, which is that migrants are going to return back to their country. And that's not always necessarily the case. Whereas the pessimists view migration in a negative light, so they think that the sum of remittances sent back home are too small to make any substantial impact on the national economy. Another thing that the pessimists or historical structural and dependency views and theories think is that it's not the poorest in society that choose to migrate, it's actually the richer households. And as a result, if you have the richer or the wealthier people migrating abroad, then that's going to widen the inequality between the rich and the poor in society. And the other, I guess another factor is that pessimists view migration as, they view it as, they think that it results in the brain drain. I'm sure you guys have heard of that term, which is basically the loss of the relatively educated people in society who are able to seek better opportunities abroad. I'm more of a believer in the new economics of labor migration, which basically views remittances as the main motive for migration, and also sees remittances as a form of income insurance. So people decide to migrate to protect themselves against any income shocks. Which makes sense. So it's basically they view remittances and migration as a decision to diversify your earnings, your income earnings. So just to give you an idea, so the data I've utilized was very recently collected data. It was collected in 2014. So the evidence I'm going to present you with at the moment is very new evidence. It hasn't been published before, but I'm working on getting it published this summer. It was collected by the Migrating Out of Poverty research program, which is funded by DFID. It uses cross-sectional household data. It covers 7,876 individuals all around Ethiopia. 7,876 individuals from 1,200 households from 4 specific regions in Ethiopia. So Ethiopia is basically, it's divided into 9 administrative regions. So the data I'm using is from Tigray, Amhara, SNNP, and Oromia. So these 4 regions. And I'm just going to present you with a bit of descriptive stats to give you an idea of what the data looks like. 77% of the households that were surveyed had a migrant, and 56% of those households had more than 1 migrant. So this is just to give you an idea of the scale of migration in those households. And just to give you an idea as well, of those households with international migrants, you can see here, 26% of households with international migrants, 26% of them migrated to the Middle East, which is a very popular destination for Ethiopian migrants, as I mentioned previously, whereas the rest all migrated internally. So actually, internal migration is higher than international migration. And I think that's something the media tends to perceive us into thinking it's the other way around, but actually we see a lot more internal migration than we do international migration. Also, the way I've classified this data is I've classified it into households with migrants and households without migrants. And when I've done that, you can see here that households without migrants have higher consumption, total monthly consumption expenditure, or per capita consumption expenditure. So basically, households without migrants appear as better off. And as you can see, so I'm just going to move on to the next slide. So what I've done is I've had to compare households with and without migrants. But obviously, some households might positively select. So you might experience the fact that it's the richer households that choose to migrate. So you can't compare richer households with poor households. So what I had to do is I implemented what's known as a Heckman model. I won't go into too much detail, but I basically modeled the consumption of households with no migrants. And I've regressed this model of consumption expenditure versus all these independent variables that determine consumption. So let's say, what determines your household consumption? Obviously, the size of your household. The number of elderly and children relative to the size of the household, so your dependency ratio. The maximum education of members in that household. Also, household dwelling characteristics. All of these factors determine your consumption. And after I've done that, and I estimated this model for households with no migrants, okay? No migrants. And after that, I used the coefficient estimates to predict what the consumption might have been for households with migrants had the migrant stayed at home. And when I did that, that gave me an estimate of their counterfactual consumption expenditure. And I was able to compare that counterfactual with their actual consumption expenditure to find out, well, were they better off or worse off with migration? And once you regress the difference, you can see that actually, if you have a higher gender ratio or higher remittances, then that would decrease your probability of being made worse off. So those are the 2 main factors. So to give you a summary of my findings, as you can see here, so had the migrant not migrated, the household consumption expenditure would have been lower than their actual. So actually, on average, households are being made better off from migration. But if you look at it based on percentiles, you'll see that the opposite applies for the lower income households. So households in the lower percentiles are actually made worse off by migration. And this is illustrated here. You can see here that lower income households, had households with migrants not migrated, they would have experienced 31% lower consumption expenditure, as illustrated in this graph. And you can see here that obviously it's the lower income households, this is in logs, are made worse off. So in conclusion, just because of time constraints, I'm not going to repeat my conclusion. I'm going to move on to my policy implications. So as you can see, on average, households are being made better off from migration. So I think policymakers need to reduce restrictions on migration. They need to put in more effort to facilitate the migration process. And the reason I say that is as well because we can see that poor households are being made worse off. And the reason they're being made worse off is because the cost of the transfer of remittances is high. The cost of migration is a very costly process. A lot of people go into debt to fund the cost of migration. They take loans from their families, their friends. It's a very costly process. Also, they're not exposed to good opportunities when they go abroad. So all these reasons explain why poor households are actually made worse off. So the government or policymakers should facilitate the transfer of money, because at the moment, all over Africa, the average of the transfer of remittances, the average cost is 12%. That's a substantial cost. So if you were to transfer $100 US, it would cost you $12 to transfer that amount of money. And that's pretty ridiculous, I think, in our time of age, where transfer of money shouldn't be that expensive. Also, policymakers should enhance the competition in remittance markets, obviously to reduce the cost of remittance transfers. Also, make the option of staying at home more attractive, especially for the poor households, because as we've seen, they're being made worse off. So policymakers should put in more effort towards investing in agricultural inputs, offering them better employment opportunities, and also pursuing urban development. And the reason I say that is because if you live in a rural area and you migrate to an urban area because there's better opportunities, this is going to create scarcity of labor in that rural area, and it's going to increase the marginal productivity. And as a result, the wages are going to go up in that rural area. So as you can see here, there's a lot of advantages to urban development as well. Also improving the infrastructure, basically creating good job opportunities for people, to just make it more attractive for them to stay at home. Also offering them, so 48% of my sampled migrants were females who moved to GCC countries. And according to the International Labour Office of Ethiopia in 2005, a lot of the female migrants were actually being paid less than others. So other, like, let's say, Filipino migrants from the Philippines, let's say. So as you can see, Ethiopian migrants are being, they're not treated as equally. So the policymakers should invest in pre-departure training on household management, should offer them training to improve their negotiation skills. And all of that is to basically improve their opportunities once they go abroad and improve their earnings capacity to ensure that they do better once they leave the country. And I'd also like to add that also by regulating the migration, by introducing employment standards, a lot of migrants tend to be exploited once they're abroad. We see a lot of human trafficking, as you mentioned. We see a lot of smuggling. And Ethiopian policymakers should be investing in the introduction of quite stringent, like, employment standards to ensure that is not the case, because it's normally the poorer households and poorer migrants that are exposed to those types of abuses. And finally, I'd like to end my presentation on this quote. It says that migration has been politicized before it has been analyzed. I think that's very true. I think migration is. It has nothing to do with politics. It has everything to do with people's livelihood and people's right to live a dignified life. And I think nowadays we live in an era where we speak about migration, we speak about refugees in the form of numbers, and we almost forget that these are humans, these are lives that we're talking about. And I think we need to invest a lot more on research into migration. Like, as I mentioned earlier, remittances are 3 times the size of foreign aid, yet we can sit here all day and in class and in academia endlessly debating foreign aid and the pros and the cons, but we constantly neglect remittances. And if there's one takeaway message from today, I want you to start realizing the importance of the phenomena of remittances and start to maybe think a bit more and try harder to study the impacts of these remittances, to facilitate them and to ensure that they're being invested in the right way. But thank you.
My topic is the nutrition and dietetic services in the context of chronic disease, which include this, of course. The aim of this study is to assess the standards of nutrition and dietetic services which is delivered to some governmental and special or private hospital in Jeddah city. Also, we want to emphasize the need or the importance of the enrollment of dietitian to be a part of the medical team for controlling and management chronic diseases. First, I will give brief idea about what is chronic kidney disease. Chronic kidney disease is structural, functional, in physiology or abnormality in kidney. It mainly related to what we call glomerular filtration rate, and it must be more than 3 months to be diagnosed as patient with chronic kidney disease. There are 5 stages of chronic kidney diseases depending on the rate of glomerular filtration rate. Stage 1, there is a kidney damage, but normal glomerular filtration rate. In the stage 2, there is kidney damage with mild glomerular filtration rate. The third one is moderate and very low glomerular filtration rate. The 5th is the end stage of chronic kidney disease, which the patient will be in dialysis or غسيل الكلوي. The prevalence of chronic kidney disease is huge. For example, here, according to a study done in 2008, it is about 8 to 16% of the patients have chronic kidney disease globally. In Saudi Arabia, patients show that with chronic kidney disease, there are about 5.7%. So it is considered as high percent, especially when we look after the complication of chronic kidney disease. What we mean here, the role of dietitian. Dietitian simply is a qualified person who is manage and treat people by using nutrients or diet. According to the National Kidney Foundation, they found that the dietitian is very important member to be involved in the team for chronic kidney disease. Also, the Council of Health Service in Saudi Arabia, they developed clinical guidelines for dietitian to follow in treating the patient with chronic kidney disease. Also, the National Kidney Disease Education Program, they established a summary guideline to assess the patient who has chronic kidney disease and how to involve the diet in their program. The role of dietitian, we have to know that we have a complete medical team to manage the chronic kidney disease. What is the exact role of dietitian? The dietitian maintain optimal nutritional status and monitor nutritional need for the patient. Also, of course, we have that the patient with chronic kidney disease, they have problem with electrolytes and protein. So the dietitian role is to balance all calories, protein, and the minerals in their diet and their body. And of course, we have menu planning. So the patient must know how to use the guidelines to follow, to know about menu planning and how to adjust new ways for their condition. And show them how to measure food and fluid correctly. What means that, of course, the patient with chronic kidney disease, he have restriction about taking fluids and electrolytes. So this is the role of dietitian to know how to balance these electrolytes. Also, if we have here every food item, we have food label. Even water, we have food label. So the dietitian role also, she showed the patient how to read the food label in any food items and to calculate it according to her need. They also provide several food lists to show the content of phosphorus, potassium. If you have any chocolate bar or if you have any water here, you can find the amount of the electrolytes on these food items. Also, we have to help combine renal diet with other special diet. For example, if you have patients, sometimes the patient with renal problem or kidney problem, they have hypertension or diabetes or maybe overweight. So the dietitian role is to maintain this diet for all the complicated condition. Also, of course, to slow the rate of progression of chronic kidney disease. These are some examples of the dietitians do for the patient as guidelines to know how to, what is the kidney health, for example, food label, phosphorus here, and kidney test result to know how to read their kidney test results. The materials which I used in this experiment, first of all, we have make a proposal for our research and introduce it to the committee of the ethical committee in applied medical science, and they give us the ethical approval. Also, we have consent form for all the hospitals to be recruited in this experiment. We have questionnaire delivered to all the hospital. It includes questions about the services and the dietetics services provided to the patient to this area. Also, we have oration here, letters from the Faculty of Applied Medical Sciences, Clinical Nutrition Department to be involved. And also we have 12 hospitals involved in this research. It is almost 10 private hospitals and 2 governmental hospitals. The methods which you used here, the ethical approval, as I mentioned before, was obtained from the Faculty of Applied Medical Sciences Ethical Committee. Also, the study design is descriptive cross-sectional study. And the inclusion criteria, all the departments who are agreed to be involved in this the study was included. The data collection, it is one set of face-to-face questionnaire by all the manager in the hospitals. And finally, we did statistical analysis conducted for using Microsoft Office Excel software 2007. The result shows that we found here that almost 60% they followed national regulations, and 25% followed international, and 8.35% followed both. When we asked the hospital about the numbers of dietitians involved in this area, they said that 33% they said that they have only one dietitian in the all hospital. And also 33.3% they said that they have more than 3, and both of them are not enough for chronic kidney disease management. Here we have the governmental hospital. They have accredited by national or internationally. Also, we found that most of them only accredited nationally, but not internationally. Here we have some questions that the dietitian or nutrition education methods. The first one here, counseling patient with poor controlled comorbidity, it is 47%. And we have educate about appropriate calorie and protein intake. They say that about 64%, which is the most one, and 52% is about how to manage their weight for the patient with kidney problems. Unfortunately, here we have asked the departments that if they're acknowledging dietitian to be as important member to be involved in chronic kidney disease management, 75% it is okay, but still there is 25% said that they can, okay, 25, I must be finished, okay. 25% said that dietitians is not important in the role of management. Oh, so not all dietitians are member of Saudi Dietetic Associations, and this is not fully aware of the accreditation status of their dietitian. Some hospitals, they did not know that if their dietitian are accredited or not. Also, they other mentioned this following the national guidelines for optimizing a patient nutrition status. Implementing nutrition education for pre-end stage kidney disease patients is critical to delay kidney disease. All this discussion, to save time, okay, is to emphasize the role of dietitian in management of chronic kidney disease. We have to develop some policies and guidelines to standardized nutrition services to provide for patients with chronic kidney disease. Also, there must be periodic evaluation for all the hospitals to know if they have the high standards of accreditation. Also, if we look after all the chronic disease cost effectiveness, there must be dietitian to reduce the side effects of the disease. Although, as we know that dietitian has very important role in preventing and treating many chronic disease, to conclude that we have any chronic disease must have a team or medical team. I will just do it here. For health care team for chronic kidney disease, we have, of course, the general practitioner is very important. Also, we have the renal coordinator, which will show the patient how to follow their condition. Also, we have medical social workers to socially help the patient, and the nephrologist or the human or the doctor who is specialized in kidney diseases, and also the pharmacist to show the patient how to use their medication appropriately. And finally, of course, the renal dietitian. To complete the picture here, I have to say that renal dietitian is very important to be involved in any medical team for chronic diseases, and the need of diasporic engagement. This is not only in Saudi Arabia, but also in Sudan. We have many dietitians abroad, even in Saudi Arabia. There are many Sudanese dietitians. One of them is Dr. Najat is here with us, and they are involved, but we are diasporic. And thank you for listening.
Why mobile banking adoption intention? Normally, if something not exists, we say intention to use, intention to adopt. This is the reason why intention, because it's not existing. We are proposing and want to see the intention of the microfinance provider, they are going to adopt or not. And also we have this for supply side, and we have another paper for demand side, which is for the customer who receives the mobile. And why mobile banking? Because we will see later on the outreach of microfinance also is an official government policy to the banking sector and financial institution provider, but the outreach is only 8%. So we want to introduce the mobile banking to financial institution of microfinance and to the customer to increase the outreach. You know, Sudan is a very big country, then we want to have a branchless bank from the mobile as it happened in Kenya and South Africa. We want to do it in Sudan. This is all the idea about microfinance. Okay? So, these unfortunately some figures about Sudan. The employment is almost 46%. The poverty and unemployment rate 16.8%. So what is the relationship between unemployment and poverty? Definitely those who have no job, they can establish their own business. So through the microfinance, we can reduce the unemployment and also we reduce the poverty. And this outreach, out of almost 8 million who are in need to microfinance, less than 1 million, which is around 8%, only receives a microfinance from financial institution. And this is the reason why we want to introduce to the government of Sudan, and this is actually financed by Islamic Development Bank also, a system that can help the outreach of microfinance via mobile banking. And this you see our African neighbors, actually we didn't learn from the developed countries, we have to learn from countries who are similar to Sudan. So in Kenya, in South Africa, in Zambia, in many countries, they already introduced the mobile microfinance, which is not a smartphone, it's just regular phone. It's a normal phone that help to facilitate all the financial activities. So we will learn from our neighbors, those who have similar environment. So what are the problems facing the adoption of microfinance. The first one is technology, ICT. We have to convince the microfinance institution and also the companies who supply ICT to provide their service to develop the microfinance. And also the model or business model now is practice. It should be also refined to be in line with microfinance mobile banking. Understanding also the mechanism drive Sudanese microfinance client intention. Actually, although this is a supply side, but we have to know the intention of the customer who receive how microfinance mobile banking will help them. Providing mobile banking service require collaboration, different stakeholders. We have the financial institutions, we have the government, and we have the telecommunication companies also, beside other collaborators. And the most important, number one, is the regulatory framework. We have to have a legal part of adopting the microfinance, which is under the cyber law. So it should be a legal framework actually develop and see the feasibility of implementing the mobile microfinance and solving all the issues associated with the adoption of mobile microfinance. So the last factor is the regulatory environment. So how the study is significant? Actually, this study has significance in terms of methodology. We realize all the people who talk about mobile internet, mobile banking, all these things, they talk about the customer side. They never think to talk about the supply side, which is the microfinance provider. These are institutions who are going to implement. We are going to implement the system. So if you don't convince the institution, how you convince the customer? Most of the studies of technology acceptance for mobile banking or mobile internet or electronic gold dinar, whatever, is talking about customer side, which is technology acceptance. So this is a big gap in the literature we have found, and we include the supply side, and we will later on you will see which is the relevant framework should be adapted for this. So this is a literature about microfinance and their performance and their impact. I don't want to, and the outreach, I already summarized the outreach is only 8%. This is the reason why we introduced the mobile banking of microfinance to, or branchless, we call it branchless, but microfinance to increase the outreach. Okay, so the theory we think about it from the literature, they call it technology organization environment. And we have modified this theory, and what we add some variables. You can see here, we have the mobile banking adoption of microfinance in Sudan as a dependent variable. And we have the organization contacts, we have top management support, financial resources, perceived benefit, government, market, government support definitely is very important, market and product. Microfinance provide the size, how is the size? Then here we have the environmental contacts, we have partners collaboration, regulatory environment, and we have the business model. Because the business model practice currently should be refined to fit with the adoption of microfinance mobile banking. And we have the technology context, ICT infrastructure should be with O, and ICT expertise. They are very important to help the system to work in the institutions. So we have modified this model, and we add some variables are not here, and all these HUC, these are the hypotheses that we have tested according to the theory and also the reality of microfinance, and then we see if accepted or rejected, what is the justification of it. Okay, so this is a contribution of the study actually, modifying this model and adding new variables were ignored in the literature. So the main findings, we found that, and I have to tell you that also this study not only involving this model, it involving interview also. We have a qualitative analysis also. We interview those who involve in microfinance and also in telecommunication sector and all the business model of microfinance, the expertise around 30, I think, from 30 microfinance provider. So we have mixed method, quantitative and qualitative. Why we need the qualitative? Because there are some information cannot be captured with the quantitative. So from the interview and the question and structure interview and the ideas, we can then capture the information that you cannot get. So overall, we found that most of the microfinance providers, they are very happy to see the mobile banking system implemented in Sudan to increase outreach, as Sudan is a very big country, and they are very happy to have the branchless banking system to increase the outreach, which is only 8%. We want to increase it to 100% because this is the only way that to reduce the poverty and also the only way to increase, to reduce the unemployment rate. Those who have no job, they can involve in any type of business and can be supported because the current business model is not supporting the people who are looking for this. The charges are very high. The interest, although they say they don't practice in Sudan, but actually it's very high. So by having the mobile banking, the transaction, and all the transaction between the microfinance provider and the customer will be very cheap and will be very easy, and I can settle everything via mobile banking as happened in our counterpart in Africa, such as Nigeria and South Africa. Is initial mobile, is not that smart actually. So I have talked about the contribution before, the significant contribution of this study in terms of body of knowledge. We have adapting the theory for supply side, we add new variables, and we close the gaps in the literature. For Sudan also, none of the people who study the supply side, there are some of them, even in the central bank, they only study the demand side. Okay? However, also contribution to the body of knowledge by introducing new 5 variables actually in the theory of adoption of mobile banking, and this variable already is stated in the paper. Thank you for your attention.
Hello and yes, welcome back again. That was Sudan Knowledge. Now you can see how Professor Alam has managed to bring people, I mean Sudanese, his fellow countrymen, you know, from all around the world, and the information that they have is so huge. So next week we will be back again with another episode of Sudan Knowledge. And please tune in again. As always, this program is on social media, is on YouTube platform, and you can subscribe to AIL TV online. We have got a YouTube channel which has got a lot of programs. It's really a source of learning in itself. So, and on that note, and I thank you for watching wherever you are from. But yes, next week I'm coming yet again with another packed Sudan Knowledge program. Now, for now, I say ciao. Okay. All right.